Classics galore from the East Coast Drag Times Hall of Fame. From drag cars to pro mod, this is Inside Drag Racing.
Welcome, everybody, to Inside Drag Racing's annual exclusive coverage of the East Coast Drag Times Hall of Fame induction ceremonies and reunion. Each and every year, downtown Henderson, North Carolina becomes one of the largest single gathering of drag racing fans and the heroes they worship. And each and every year, Inside Drag Racing brings you not only some of the new inductees, but some of the most amazing machines that are on display here on this incredible open-air, free-to-the-public weekend event. The very first time we got a chance to see Pro Stock Eliminator in NHRA competition was the early part of 1970. The National Hot Rod Association took a cue from the United Drag Racers Association, which started a heads-up Superstock class in 1967, and the American Hot Rod Association, which did the same in 1968 and created what they called Pro Stock. But the cars that were created, including Hemi-powered Plymouths that never had Hemis in them, Cammer-powered Fords that definitely didn't come with single overhead cam engines, and rat-motored Chevrolets that never existed, took the hearts of the nation's drag racing fans by storm. John Livingston was there at the beginning, driving the Tennessee Thunder Dodge Demon with Hemi power in that first year of Pro Stock. But John, I have a feeling that you were racing heads-up Superstock long before NHRA said you could.
Oh, yeah. When we first started racing, they spotted you a car length at a time,
Right.
but like heads up, dead start. But I guess, in 65, we started running the Superstock meets and all that, so. And then it turned into Pro Stock. And
they changed everything in 1972. What we referred to as weight break racing, where the car had to weigh so many pounds per cubic inch. Did that help or hinder you?
It didn't bother us because he just bought the old Motown car from Chrysler, and it flew.
Yeah, it was one of the fastest cars on the planet.
Oh, yeah.
You came back to Superstock Eliminator, though, pretty quickly.
Yeah, 1975.
In fact, you raced till just a few years ago.
I'm still racing.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, you're a regular on the NHRA National Event Tour still to this day. This particular car is a great example, and I should point out that it's been reconstructed to its present form. Who did the work?
Larry Farrell. They found it down in Florida. Lee found it in Florida. It's been sitting there 30 years.
What was the key that identified it? I mean, a lot of times when you get a basket case, there's one little thing that proves that this was the Tennessee Thunder car.
If you look at the paint, we scratched the top of it off, and it had the green paint, and still had one of my numbers in the window, 204. So,
wow.
But anybody could have put a number in it. But it was after we got to it, it was an original car.
This particular car is one of the best examples we've ever seen of the earliest of the Pro Stock efforts. There weren't many cars that survived that era that didn't become later race cars, bracket racers, etc. But nowadays, when you get one of the original cars like this in this kind of condition, it's absolutely a keeper. We're lucky this year to be inducting the one and only Della Woods. Her career with a supercharged nitro engine precedes just about anybody else's dragster or full-bodied car.
I'm lucky that I was able to do what I did, and we were pioneers, and we set the pace, and look what's going on with women in racing now. 1964, we bought the Lawman car, the 63 Dodge, and we ran it as a super stock for a while. Bernie drove, and I drove the Powder Puffs, and I kept winning. So he said, hey, there's a girl on the West Coast in a funny car, let's give it a try. We moved the wheelbase, and we put the big Hemi in it, and we went off to match race.
You took Al Extran's Lawman car and made it a real-live, supercharged, nitro-burning, altered wheelbase car, the most evil handling vehicle in drag racing history.
Yeah, it was, but I don't know what Bernie did to the chassis, but that car would go straight as an arrow.
Really?
And, yes, it would. And I mean, there were little handling problems here and there, like we ran Yellow River, hit the bump and left the ground. But the car was pretty decent. We called tracks all over the country. Because I was a woman, they were a little skeptical, but we started out at tracks like Hank and Suffolk, and they booked Paula and I. They took my license away. We went to a track in Michigan. The Michigan track threw us out, said, you can't drive here. It's an NHRA track, and you don't have a license anymore.
Why did they take your license?
They claimed that it was because it was too dangerous for women, but Paula still had her license. So here we were thrown out of this track. We had depended on getting the money for the match race. And we called NHRA and we said, listen, if you take our license, you're going to have to take Paula's. They recanted. I'm not sure if Andy Granatelli helped, but we're assuming he did, and they sent me a letter and said, we're going to give you your license back. An exciting time at that time. Like I said, a pioneer move for us.
And I should point out, you stuck with it then for another, 15, 18 years. One of Detroit's absolute best-known motorsports stars. But Della Woods is more than just a nitro funny car racer, and that indeed is why she's being inducted in the East Coast Hall of Fame. Della Woods is drag racing history.
We'll be back with more from Henderson, North Carolina after this. This edition of Inside Drag Racing is being brought to you by ARP, the world leader in racing fastener technology. Precision Turbo, the world's foremost manufacturer of high-performance aftermarket turbochargers. And by Race Gas, get more out of your engine.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Inside Drag Racing's annual exclusive coverage of the East Coast Drag Times Hall of Fame induction ceremony and reunion. Each and every year, Henderson, North Carolina comes alive with thousands upon thousands of hardcore drag racing and car show fans that indeed engulf the streets of this town into one of the most incredible festivals of nostalgia drag racing and street rod machinery. Of course, each and every year, there's one woman who's responsible for not only this fantastic weather, but this amazing event. And her name is Nancy Wilson. Nancy, might be able to hear in the background, it's almost the bewitching hour. Every year at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we start a fire up of all 1,500 cars here. Who came up with this idea?
I think all of us did. We just all had a hand in that. You know, all drag racers like to hear those engines roar.
Sure.
Yeah.
This is what, year number 14 now? And in fact, this is, again, can't believe we're saying it, a bigger turnout than we had last year, both in terms of cars and actual human beings.
I think we set a record for cars, and from looking down the street, I think we might have set a record for,
You can't move.
for spectators, yeah.
Just wall-to-wall human beings.
Yeah.
Now, what about the actual East Coast Hall of Fame itself, the physical building? What's the update?
Well, we're still waiting to trying to find some funding for the building. We need sponsorship funding for the building.
But this is for a specific county-run Drag Racing Hall of Fame. This isn't a for-profit venture.
No, nonprofit.
And where can people get a hold of information if they want to help support?
East Coast Drag Times Hall of Fame or 252-438-2222, Nancy Wilson.
Absolutely, because you're the person that created this. You're the person that unfortunately bears the weight on her shoulders of maintaining this thing. But I want to tell you, on behalf of all the people that come here each year, they can't thank you enough for presenting this event.
I can't thank them enough for supporting it, because without the spectators and the cars that are here, we couldn't have the event. Everyone's just been fantastic. They have a good time. We want to keep coming back.
Absolutely. And during Inside Drag Racing, we'll be treating you to meeting some of the great names that will be inducted this year. One of the events that the NHRA produced was in Allentown, Pennsylvania in 1955 at an airfield called Convair Field. It's now Allentown, Pennsylvania's main airport. But at that first event, a young man by the name of Ed Kowalski out of Reading, Pennsylvania, saw his first drag race. And a few years later, he was campaigning this fuel-injected dragster on a national scale. Where did this dragster end up? Only one man knows. His son, E.J. Kowalski. Is this the real thing?
This is a replica of my dad's original car.
How much of this thing did you have to go off of to reconstruct?
Mostly old photographs and a few odds and ends, the tires and wheels we had found from the original car that my dad bought in the 60s.
Did you deal with a lot of guys who knew the car well, maybe that helped with him?
Everybody, the original pinstriper, the guy who painted it,
Wow.
everybody, they all jumped in and helped me out to make this replica.
When did your dad, I should say, start running this car?
It was in 61 it was built. It ran the first Maple Grove meet in 62 when Maple Grove opened, and ran all over the East Coast, at Mason-Dixon, New Media, Atco, everywhere.
And this car was state-of-the-art at the time. In fact, it was on the Linwood chassis team, which pretty much dominated the record books back then.
Yes, Linwood chassis were very good. They're a local chassis company. My dad was a dealer through a speed shop. The speed shop had closed down in 65. My dad sort of quit drag racing, retired, came back in '75, and I was looking at all the old pictures and stuff, and I said, "What's drag racing?" He said, "Go play baseball." So I said, "No, this looks like fun." He goes, "All right, we'll get something together," and ever since we've been doing custom cars and hot rods and drag race.
His active career is now spanning a half a century.
Oh yes, it's been he quit in '65, got back in '75. We started racing Bonneville in '88, and
Right.
we've been doing that ever since. So.
Yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the family has a very strong presence in the gas roadster classes at Bonneville.
Yeah, last time we ran 3 cars at Bonneville, all vintage engines mostly.
The original Linwood chassis team had a lot of killer members. Ed Kowalski was one of the best known. In fact, at the NHRA U.S. Nationals back in the 1961, 62, and 63 years, this car could be seen campaigning on gasoline in very, very competitive style. But thanks to E.J. Kowalski, his dad and his mom, history has returned to the Kowalski family.
This week's ARP quarter-mile quiz question comes from Dave in Austin, Texas. Dave asks, why don't alcohol pro mods run superchargers instead of blowers? This week's ARP quarter-mile quiz question comes from Dave in Austin, Texas. Dave asks, why don't alcohol pro mods run superchargers instead of blowers?
I mean, they won't let you run a screw compressor, but what we got, the roots would actually be better than that. What we actually need is the one like the alcohol funny cars and all run probably. That would be the better, but you know, as it is what the rules will let us run, we got the best they'll let us run.
Welcome back to Inside Drag Racing's exclusive annual coverage of the East Coast Drag Times Hall of Fame induction ceremonies and reunion. One of the best known sportsman drivers of a huge number of sportsman stars here is Kurt Smith. Now this man is one of the most soft-spoken individuals we've ever dealt with, and we've been dealing with him since the early 1980s. But I don't care how quiet he is, you remember well the beginning of 1985 when you showed up at the first IHRA National Event of the Year and won Stock Eliminator. You went to the second IHRA National Event of the Year and won Stock Eliminator. You went to the third IHRA National Event of the Year and you won Stock Eliminator, and it was all in this car behind you. You have to consider that one of the greatest moments in your life.
Yes, it's the greatest moment of my life in Stock Eliminator. I mean, I was real fortunate to do something like that. I was real proud.
Hardly anybody can claim that same accomplishment. 3 consecutive national event wins. How many national event total in your career did you win?
I think it's 17.
17, which puts you, if I'm not mistaken, in the top 20 in IHRA all-time winners.
I think I'm number 9.
Oh, geez, I apologize then. You're in the top 10, indeed. This little car behind you has won possibly as much money as any other Stock Eliminator car in history. And you've been racing it. It's still competitive now, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I could carry it now and it'd be just as good as it ever was, I think. As long as you run index and all, you still got a good chance of winning.
Where did hot stuff come from in the family?
Just one my father had at the shop, and I decided to pick it up and fix it.
So your dad actually had this car in the shop, but it wasn't a race car yet?
No, I made it into a race car.
And what was the first year that you started racing it?
This car here about 1980.
So this car actually has had going on 35 years of history behind it.
Yeah, right.
There was never any reason to get rid of it, but you eventually drove other cars.
Yeah, I drove other cars, but I've just always been sentimental to this car, and so I'm going to hang on to it.
Kurt Jr. is indeed going to be driving this car sooner than later, and he's actually proven himself pretty well. I can't imagine that was by accident.
No, I mean, he's been doing good with it.
Probably since day after he was born.
Right, He caught on quick, you know.
And rightfully so. He's got a dad that's absolutely one of the great drivers in IHRA Stock Eliminator history, in anybody's Stock Eliminator history for that matter. This guy is one of the greats in pro stock history, and in fact will be inducted this year. Larry Lombardo, who first claimed fame on the East Coast in the late 1960s as a Stock Eliminator driver until, what were you, 19 years old when you took your Corvette to the NHRA U.S. Nationals title?
Yes, 19. I was the youngest at the time to ever win a national event at that time.
Little Corvette called Buckshot. I believe it was a manually shifted stocker, was it not?
Yeah, it was G stock at the time. 4-speed.
Now, at that time that you won the U.S. Nationals, a guy named Bill Grumpy Jenkins lived not too far from you in Pennsylvania and was absolutely one of the biggest names in the sport. Yet you, as a 19-year-old kid, attracted his attention. Grumpy Jenkins came to you.
Yes, he did. And he was a very smart man. He got the right people at the right time. We didn't have a big machine shop, but he had connections with machine shops that did all our work. I did all the cylinder heads for him.
Well, yeah, let's bring in the fact that not only did he want you to drive for him, he wanted you to work for him.
Correct, yes. And I drove and worked on it. And we were like father and son. We spent 360 days a year together. And so we had a perfect, relationship. And he saw the talent that I had, and he said, you have to win. He said, I can win, I can lose, and it's okay with Chevrolet, but you have to win. And
No kidding.
I said, don't worry, I'll win. And I did. I put 150,000 miles on the rig a year traveling, and today they fly, but it was a lot of work, but it was, it's what we did. I always said, wow, everybody's working for a living, and I'm doing this. I didn't make a whole lot of money, but that was my college education.
The fact that you and Jenkins got along so great stymied a lot of people, but a lot of that was because of this misconception about Bill being grumpy. He, in fact, was one of the most kind-hearted people in drag racing.
You couldn't ask for a kinder, gentler person. If you made sense, he would talk to you and help you. If you talk like an idiot, he'd walk away from you. And he grumbled and grumpy, never did that to me. I was like the nice guy, he was like the grump. And we had threats already, like he better talk to me, and I'd go and say, Bill, you better talk to that guy because he's going to kick our butts. But that's the kind of relationship we had, and it was good.
Wayne Melly's beautiful reconstruction of one of the Grumpy's toy Chevy Monzas is an example of really one of the last cars that you campaigned for, Jenkins. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Joe Lapone took over the seat from you in about 1980?
1979, I quit at Indianapolis. And then Ray Allen drove the car, and then Joe Lapone drove after that in the Camaro.
Well, we're lucky enough to have Larry here today, and indeed, as the ambassador to the late, great Bill Jenkins. Bear in mind that while his world championships and dozens of national event victories in all three associations count for a lot, they can't top the fact that Larry Lombardo is generally acknowledged as the Grumps Kid.
More classics from the East Coast Drag Times Hall of Fame coming up. This edition of Inside Drag Racing is being brought to you by ARP, the world leader in racing fastener technology, the School of Automotive Machinists, education at full speed, and by Steel Rubber, quality crafted rubber parts and weather stripping.
Oh, you've seen a lot of repop cars in nostalgia drag racing, but there's a reason that this one had to be completely rebuilt, and nobody knows it better than this guy. Basically, the only thing left of the original car is one single photograph.
That was correct. When we first decided to recreate the car, everything was formed off of one photograph. And it's iconic because it's out there on the interwebs.
Yep.
The car was photographed from the top of the hill at New England Dragway.
Yep.
On June 13th, 1971, Richie went into a wheel stand, blew the motor. It oiled in the cockpit. He lost control of the car when it came down. The car was completely destroyed. The only thing left of the vehicle was from the rear axle rearward.
Right.
In the photograph, you can see Richie upside down and going backwards across the finish line.
And the only reason that part of the car is identifiable in that photograph is because of one tire and the parachute beginning to come out of the pack.
Correct. That's right. That parachute that stayed in the pack, didn't come out, is in this car. We had never met, and during my racing career, everybody would come up to me and ask if you were related to the Top Fuel driver, Richie Broughton, out of New York. When I was thinking about building a car, what better car to do than one that had my last name on the car? When I had contacted Richie about 5 years ago, his first question was, why? My driving days were pretty much over, and told him what I wanted to do, and he said, well, come on out to New York. He said, come with me, and we went to the back corner of the garage, and under a tarp for 40 plus years was every piece of the car that went home that Sunday.
In the back of a pickup truck, probably.
Correct, in the back of the wagon that they had. This was the last of the front-motored cars that he raced competitively. There was a rear-engine car that he was building at the time this crashed,
Right.
and that one was never finished in campaign.
Right.
So after the 71 season, Richie decided to turn his attention to charter boat fishing. All his boats are named Comanche.
I'll be darned.
And but this was the last car he made his last pass in. He's still with us, but this was the last car he campaigned.
What you're looking at is a recreation of a car that hasn't existed in some 45 years. But in that half century, a lot of people did remember Richie Broughton and the Comanche. None more so than the man who has brought it back to life. One of the stars of the Gasser Wars is here being inducted this year, but you probably recognize him more for his nitro career. Ron Colson, out of the state of Illinois, driver of the Hawaiian, driver of the Chi-Town Hustler, driver of numerous fuel dragsters, driver of numerous sportsman cars, including the Gassers in the early 1960s. A lot of people don't realize that there are very few cars you didn't drive in a 40-year career.
Well, it was a long career, and it included a lot. But certainly the Gasser era was one of the great times, and I like the impact that we were able to have with our injected gasser, some of the records we set. But what we have here before us is the star of that area. Big John and Stone Woods and Cook, that was the ultimate rivalry. We did the first ever 1-hour show on drag racing on ESPN when we did the 1980 Pop Hot Rod meet. It broke some new ground, and I'm very proud of what we did there. It just wasn't able to continue in the big leagues of TV. It was a 10-year lifespan there that we covered the entire sport, all the different associations. We were, although our roots were in UDRA had its roots in working with all the sanctioning bodies. So we were covering the whole sport, and it was a great era.
You are indeed the president of Track Planning Associates, which is a business that, for all intents and purposes, takes track owners through the trials and tribulations of building a new track, correct?
That's what we've done in recent years, and it seems pretty simple. You got a straight line piece of pavement, you just go out and race. But the intricacies to get into the guard walls, the asphalt pavement, the right compounding of the concrete or the asphalt, the tracks where you have concrete starting line and asphalt, how you make those transitions, how you keep everything right throughout a race, and then working with the event promoters on track prep for the events. It's a real science and far more complicated than anybody might realize.
Like I said, Ron Colson's been around this business a long, long time. His first drag race was the 4th annual World Series of Drag Racing in Cordova, Illinois in 1957. He started racing very shortly after that, and his driving career went well into the 1980s. But, like I said, his accomplishments in this sport go far beyond just driving. And indeed, he's one of the best candidates ever for the most comprehensive entry into the East Coast Hall of Fame.
The 2015 inductee class is filled with great racers from different generations, all deserving of this honor. From Inside Drag Racing, thanks for watching and see you next time.